Have you ever wondered why certain patterns appear everywhere in nature, from the spiral of galaxies to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower? What if I told you these aren't random coincidences, but rather glimpses of a hidden mathematical language that forms the very blueprint of creation? Welcome to Sacred Geometry Explained, the hidden blueprint of creation. I'm your guide into this deep exploration of how the universe speaks through shape, pattern, and form, revealing a code that has been studied by mystics and scientists alike for millennia. If you're ready to see beyond the veil of ordinary perception and understand the geometric framework upon which reality itself is constructed, be sure to subscribe as we decode the sacred architecture of existence. Foreign Sacred Code: Decoding the Geometry of Reality. Preface. In the silent language of the cosmos, there exists a fundamental code, a geometric blueprint that underlies all of creation. This is not merely an aesthetic pattern or mathematical curiosity, but rather the very grammar through which the universe expresses itself. You have likely glimpsed fragments of this code throughout your life, in the perfect spiral of a nautilus shell, the hexagonal chambers of a honeycomb, or perhaps in the feeling of resonance when entering certain sacred spaces. These are not coincidences, but whispers of a deeper order. Having journeyed through more fundamental metaphysical concepts, you stand now at the threshold of a more profound exploration. The study of sacred geometry represents a convergence of science and spirituality, of measurable form and ineffable meaning. It is both exoteric in its mathematical precision and esoteric in its implications for consciousness. What if the shapes and proportions that recur throughout nature are not just physical phenomena, but expressions of vibrational principles that extend beyond our material perception? What if, by understanding these forms, we might glimpse the very thought processes of creation itself? This exploration will take us from the primordial point of singularity through increasingly complex geometric expressions, each building upon the last in a cosmic unfoldment that mirrors the evolution of consciousness itself. We will examine how ancient civilizations encoded this knowledge in their architecture and art, how modern science is rediscovering these principles at quantum and cosmic scales, and most importantly, how this understanding might transform your perception of reality itself. The journey ahead is not merely intellectual, but experiential. The patterns we will explore exist not only in the external world, but within the very structure of your consciousness. As above, so below, as within, so without. This ancient Hermetic axiom takes on new meaning when we recognize that the same geometric principles organizing galaxies also orchestrate the neural networks of your brain and the energy fields of your subtle body. I invite you now to approach this material with both analytical precision and intuitive openness. Some concepts may challenge conventional understanding, while others may resonate with what you have always intuitively known. The goal is not to provide definitive answers, but to expand the framework through which you perceive and interact with reality. For in the end, sacred geometry is not merely something to be studied, it is something to be experienced, embodied, and ultimately, consciously expressed. Let us begin our descent into the geometric mysteries that have captivated the greatest minds throughout human history, not as distant observers, but as conscious participants in the ongoing creative expression of the universe itself. Chapter 1: The Point, Line, and Circle. Foundational elements and their symbolism. In the beginning, there was the point. Before exploring the complex manifestations of sacred geometry that appear throughout our universe, we must first understand the primordial elements from which all geometric forms arise. These foundational symbols, the point, the line, and the circle, represent not merely mathematical abstractions, but metaphysical principles that underlie the very structure of existence. The point: singularity and potential. What is a point truly? In Euclidean geometry, it is defined as a location having no dimension, neither length, width, nor depth. It occupies no space, yet paradoxically, it is the foundation of all spatial understanding. This apparent contradiction reveals the first great mystery of sacred geometry. From nothingness comes everything. The point symbolizes unity, consciousness, the state of being before division, before duality. In Hermetic philosophy, this represents the absolute, the all, the unmanifested potential from which all manifestation emerges. The Kybalion speaks of this as the state before the outpouring of divine mind into creation. It is worth contemplating. If the point has no dimension, how can it be the source of a dimensional universe? Perhaps this paradox hints at the nature of consciousness itself, formless, yet giving rise to all form. In theosophical teachings, particularly those of Blavatsky, the point is associated with what she termed beingness, a state beyond even the concept of being, which implies existence within time and space. This primordial point exists in what the ancient wisdom traditions called the eternal now, outside the limitations of sequential time. Have you ever experienced moments of profound meditation where all sense of dimension and time dissolve, leaving only awareness itself? In such states, one might be touching upon this point consciousness, the zero dimension from which all dimensions emerge. The line, movement, and duality. When the point extends itself, the line is born. This first movement from zero dimension to one dimension represents the initial creative impulse, the first vibration that disturbs the perfect stillness of unity. With this extension comes the first experience of duality, here and there, beginning and end, self and other. The line symbolizes the masculine principle in many esoteric systems: active, penetrating, directive. It represents will in motion, the focused intention that cuts through potentiality to create definition. In Gnostic thought, this might be understood as the first emanation from the ineffable source, the initial distinction that allows for further creation. Consider this. Every journey you have ever taken, physically or metaphysically, begins with drawing a line from where you are to where you intend to be. The line is direction, purpose, and the courage to move from the security of the known point into the unknown. What lines are you currently drawing in your own consciousness? What directions are you extending your awareness? The circle, wholeness, and cycles. When the line rotates around the point, the circle emerges, the first complete shape, having no beginning or end. The circle represents wholeness, cycles, and the return to unity within diversity. It is the feminine principle in many traditions, encompassing, nurturing, containing. The profound relationship between the point and the circle reveals another fundamental principle. Every point on the circumference of a circle is equidistant from the center point. This mathematical truth carries deep metaphysical significance. It suggests that all manifestations, no matter how diverse they appear, remain equally connected to their source. In the words of Hermes Trismegistus, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. The circle appears throughout human spiritual symbolism, from the mandalas of Eastern traditions to the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals, from the medicine wheels of indigenous peoples to the circular dances of Sufi mystics. What is it about this form that resonates so deeply with human consciousness? Perhaps it is because the circle reflects the cyclical nature of existence itself, the rhythm of days and seasons, of breath and heartbeat, of life and death and rebirth, the divine trinity of form. Together, these three elements, point, line, and circle, create a trinity that forms the basis of all more complex geometric expressions. They represent the metaphysical principles of unity, duality, and harmony, or in more mystical terms, source, movement, and completion. This trinity appears in various guises throughout spiritual traditions, as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in Christianity, as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in Hinduism, as the three gunas or qualities of nature in Vedic philosophy. What if these theological concepts are describing the same fundamental pattern that we see expressed in sacred geometry? What if the structure of consciousness itself follows these geometric principles? In the Hermetic tradition, these three elements correspond to the three primary principles: the point as the principle of mind, the ALL, the line as the principle of cause and effect, movement and direction, and the circle as the principle of rhythm, cycles and return. As we contemplate these connections, we begin to see that sacred geometry is not merely about physical forms, but about the underlying principles that govern both matter and consciousness, from abstraction to manifestation. While these geometric elements may seem abstract, their expressions surround us in the physical world. The point manifests as the seed, the atom, the singularity. The line appears as growth, direction, the trunk of a tree reaching skyward. The circle emerges in the ripples on water, the pupil of an eye, the full moon against the night sky. More profoundly, these elements exist within our own being. The point is our essential awareness, the eye that perceives. The line is our will and attention, the direction of our consciousness. The circle is our field of experience, the boundary between self and world that both separates and connects us to everything else. As you move through your day following this contemplation, I invite you to observe these primordial forms in your environment and in your own awareness. Notice how the point, line, and circle interact to create the world you experience. Where do you recognize the singularity of the point? Where do you observe the direction of the line? Where do you experience the wholeness of the circle? For in recognizing these patterns, you begin to perceive not just the forms themselves, but the consciousness that shapes them. And in this recognition lies the first key to decoding the sacred geometry of reality, the understanding that these patterns are not merely observed by consciousness, but are expressions of consciousness itself. The journey from point to line to circle is not merely a mathematical progression, but a metaphysical one, a journey that mirrors our own evolution from unity consciousness through the experience of duality to the eventual reintegration of multiplicity into harmonious wholeness. And this is just the beginning of our exploration into the geometric language of creation. Chapter 2. Vesica Piscis and the Seed of Life, the Geometry of Creation and Unity. Having explored the primordial elements of point, line, and circle, we now venture into the realm where these elements begin to interact and create more complex patterns of relationship. The Vesica Piscis and the Seed of Life represent the next stages in the geometric unfoldment of creation, where unity begins to express itself through multiplicity while maintaining its essential wholeness. The Vesica Piscis, sacred intersection. When two circles of equal radius intersect such that the center of each circle lies on the circumference of the other, a mandorla-shaped space is created in their overlap. This almond-shaped portal is known as the Vesica Piscis, Latin for bladder of the fish, though its significance extends far beyond this humble anatomical reference. What makes this seemingly simple geometric form so profound? Consider what it represents metaphysically: two complete holes, overlapping to create a third space that belongs to both, yet is distinct from either. Is this not a perfect geometric expression of relationship itself, of how separate entities can join to create something new while maintaining their individual integrity? The Vesica Piscis embodies the principle of sacred union, the marriage of opposites that generates creation. In Hermetic philosophy, this reflects the principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The overlapping circles can represent any pair of complementary forces: masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, heaven and earth, conscious and unconscious. The proportions within the Vesica Piscis reveal mathematical relationships of profound significance. The ratio of the height of the Vesica Piscis to its width approximates the square root of 3, creating what geometers call the measure of the fish. This irrational number, like P or F, phi, cannot be expressed as a simple fraction, perhaps hinting at the transcendent nature of the creative principle it represents. More remarkable still is that within the Vesica Piscis, we find the foundation for constructing equilateral triangles, squares, and regular polygons, the building blocks for more complex sacred geometric forms. It is as though this intersection of circles serves as a cosmic womb from which all other regular forms are born. Have you ever considered that your own creative endeavors might follow this same pattern? that the intersection of seemingly separate ideas or influences in your consciousness creates a third space from which entirely new concepts emerge. What vesica piscis are you currently forming in your life? What sacred unions of complementary forces are generating new possibilities within your field of experience? The symbolism across traditions. The vesica piscis appears throughout human spiritual iconography, often in contexts that suggest its role as a portal or gateway between realms. In Christian art, Christ and various saints are frequently depicted within this almond-shaped aureole, suggesting their position at the intersection of divine and human realms. The fish symbol adopted by early Christians, the ichthys, is derived from the vesica piscis, perhaps acknowledging this form's connection to spiritual birth and transformation. In Eastern traditions, particularly tantric systems, the vesica piscis corresponds to the yoni, the feminine creative principle and source of life. The overlapping triangles of the Sri Yantra, forming a central space remarkably similar to the vesica piscis, represent the union of Shiva and Shakti, cosmic consciousness and creative energy. In the mystical Jewish tradition of Kabbalah, the vesica piscis can be seen as representing Da'at, the invisible sephira that forms when Chokmah, wisdom, the masculine principle, and Binah, understanding, the feminine principle, unite. This hidden knowledge point is considered the gateway to higher consciousness. What if these diverse traditions are all recognizing, through different symbolic languages, the same fundamental principle of creation through the union of complementary forces? What if the vesica piscis represents not merely a geometric curiosity, but a template for how consciousness itself evolves and creates, from vesica piscis to the seed of life? As profound as the vesica piscis is in isolation, its true generative power becomes evident when we observe what happens as this process of circle creation continues. When a circle is placed with its center at each of the 6 points where the original circle intersects with the second circle, a pattern of 7 interlocking circles emerges. This configuration is known as the seed of life, the embryonic stage of increasingly complex sacred geometric patterns. The seed of life contains within it the invisible framework of the cube of space, the three-dimensional template through which physical reality is structured. The centers of the 7 circles correspond to the vertices of an octahedron, one of the Platonic solids we will explore in greater depth in a later chapter. Already, we can glimpse how these seemingly simple circular relationships generate the complex spatial frameworks that govern material manifestation. The number 7 that emerges in the seed of life carries profound significance across multiple wisdom traditions. We find 7 days of creation, 7 classical planets, 7 chakras, 7 notes in the diatonic musical scale, 7 colors in the rainbow. This numerical resonance suggests that the seed of life pattern might represent a fundamental vibrational template that manifests across multiple domains of existence. In theosophical teachings, these 7 interlocked circles might correspond to what Blavatsky described as the 7 planes of consciousness, or the 7 principles of man. Each circle represents a distinct vibrational frequency or level of awareness, yet all remain interconnected in a unified whole. Might your own consciousness contain such distinct yet interconnected aspects? How might recognizing this internal geometry affect your understanding of yourself? The Genesis pattern. The progression from point to seed of life follows a sequence that mirrors accounts of creation found in various spiritual traditions. 1. The point, day 1. Let there be light, the initial spark of consciousness. 2. The line and first circle, day 2. Division of waters above from waters below, the establishment of duality. 3. The vesica piscis, day 3. The emergence of dry land from the waters, the first stable structure. 4. The additional circles forming the seed of life, days 4 through 7. The creation of heavenly bodies, living creatures, and finally, conscious human beings. This geometric unfoldment provides a visual template for understanding how unity progressively expresses itself through increasingly complex forms while maintaining its essential interconnectedness. Each stage emerges organically from the previous one, not through external imposition but through the natural extension of inherent principles. What if the biblical account of creation, far from being merely mythological, represents an encoded description of this geometric progression? What if similar creation myths across cultures are attempting to describe, through the language of symbol and metaphor, this same mathematical unfoldment of consciousness into form, the seed of life in nature and human design? The pattern of the seed of life doesn't exist merely as an abstract geometric concept. It appears throughout the natural world. We see it in the cellular division of embryos, where a single cell divides into 2, then 4, then 8, forming a spherical structure remarkably similar to the seed of life configuration. We find it in the arrangement of seeds, in fruits, in the structure of ice crystals, and in the atomic configurations of certain molecules. Human designers and architects throughout history have incorporated this pattern, consciously or unconsciously, into their creations. From the rosettes in Gothic cathedral windows to the mandalas of Eastern spiritual traditions, from the layout of ancient temple complexes to modern architectural innovations, the seed of life pattern continues to inform human creative expression. Leonardo da Vinci studied this pattern extensively, using it as a foundation for his drawings of plant structures and his explorations of human proportions. For Leonardo and other Renaissance thinkers influenced by Hermetic philosophy, these geometric patterns were not arbitrary, but revealed the underlying mathematical harmony of creation, the same harmony they sought to express through their art. Meditating on the seed of life. Beyond intellectual understanding, the seed of life offers a powerful template for meditation and consciousness expansion. By contemplating this form, either visually or through visualization, one can experience a resonance with the creative principles it embodies. Begin by imagining a single point of light at your center. Allow this point to expand into a sphere of luminous energy. From this first circle, visualize a second circle emerging, forming the vesica piscis. Continue the process until you perceive the complete seed of life structure radiating from your center. As you hold this image, consider, how might this pattern relate to your own creative process? In what ways does your consciousness follow this same unfoldment? From unity, through duality, into multiplicity? What new possibilities emerge at each intersection, each vesica piscis, within your field of awareness? Some practitioners report that sustained meditation on the seed of life can facilitate access to what Gnostic traditions call direct knowing, or gnosis, knowledge that comes not through external authority, but through immediate perception of geometric principles operating within consciousness itself. Could it be that by aligning our awareness with these fundamental patterns, we gain insight into the very structure of reality, the bridge between dimensions? Perhaps most intriguingly, the seed of life represents a bridge between dimensions. From the zero-dimensional point, to the one-dimensional line, to the two-dimensional circle, to the three-dimensional sphere implied by the seed of life configuration, we witness a progression through dimensional states that mirrors the evolution of consciousness itself. In more esoteric interpretations, particularly those found in certain Kabbalistic and theosophical teachings, this dimensional progression continues beyond the physical into what might be termed higher vibrational states or subtle planes of existence. The same geometric principles that govern physical manifestation are understood to operate on these more refined levels, creating a continuous spectrum from the densest matter to the most subtle consciousness. What if our own spiritual evolution follows this same geometric progression? What if the expansion of consciousness that many traditions describe as enlightenment or awakening corresponds to a shift in our perception, from identifying exclusively with three-dimensional physical reality to recognizing the higher dimensional geometric patterns that inform it, the living code? As we conclude our exploration of the vesica piscis and seed of life, I invite you to consider these forms not as static, geometric curiosities, but as dynamic, living principles that operate within your own being. The same patterns that structure galaxies and atoms are at work in your consciousness, your creativity, your relationships. The next time you witness the birth of something new, an idea, a project, a relationship, observe how it follows this same sacred geometry, from singularity, through relationship, to the emergence of complex new forms that contain the seeds of further creation. For in recognizing these patterns, we begin to decode not just an abstract, sacred geometry, but the very language through which consciousness expresses itself as reality. And in this recognition lies a profound opportunity to align our creative expression with the same principles that govern the cosmos itself. As we move forward in our exploration, these foundational patterns of the Vesica Piscis and seed of life will serve as the basis for understanding increasingly complex geometric expressions, culminating in what is perhaps the most comprehensive template of creation, the flower of life. Chapter 3: The Flower of Life, the interconnected blueprint of existence. From the seed of life emerges a pattern of such profound significance that it has been revered across civilizations and millennia, a pattern that appears on temple walls from ancient Egypt to China, from the Middle East to South America. This is the flower of life, a geometric mandala consisting of multiple evenly spaced, overlapping circles arranged in a hexagonal pattern. Far from being merely decorative, this intricate configuration represents nothing less than the comprehensive blueprint of all existence, a visual encoding of the mathematical relationships that govern the universe from the subatomic to the cosmic scale. The geometric unfoldment, the progression from seed of life to flower of life, follows the same principle of organic expansion we've been exploring. The 7 circles of the seed of life generate new circles as the pattern continues to unfold, with each new circle centered on the intersection points of existing circles. This creates rings of increasingly complex relationships, expanding outward like ripples on water. The complete flower of life contains 19 circles enclosed within a larger circle, forming a hexagonal grid pattern. These 19 circles represent a state of balanced complexity, a harmony between unity and multiplicity. The number 19 itself carries significance in various mystical systems. In Kabbalistic gematria, 19 corresponds to the Hebrew word chava, meaning to live, or Eve, the mother of life. In the ancient Egyptian system, the 19 circles relate to the 19 lines needed to construct the squared circle, a symbol of heaven and earth in perfect balance. What is remarkable about this pattern is that it emerges naturally from the simple process of circle creation we've been following. There is no arbitrary imposition of design, only the consistent application of a principle. Place a new circle centered at each point where existing circles intersect. This self-generating quality suggests that the flower of life pattern may indeed represent a fundamental process by which consciousness manifests as form, the universal template. Within the framework of the flower of life lie the geometric blueprints for virtually everything in our physical universe. By connecting various points within this pattern, we can derive all 5 Platonic solids, the only perfectly regular 3-dimensional forms which correspond to the elemental building blocks of matter, the tree of life of Kabbalistic tradition, the structural framework describing the process of divine manifestation, the proportions of the human body, as famously illustrated by Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, the structure of atomic and molecular configurations, the patterns of growth in plants and the symmetry of crystals, the harmonic relationships in music, the mathematical ratios that create consonance and resonance. This comprehensive quality led the ancient Hermetic philosophers to consider the flower of life a visual representation of what they called the universal mind, the organizing intelligence behind all creation. In more contemporary terms, we might view it as a 2-dimensional projection of a multi-dimensional fractal pattern that informs all levels of reality. Have you ever contemplated how a single template could contain the information necessary to generate such diverse manifestations? What might this suggest about the underlying unity of phenomena that appear on the surface to be entirely different from one another? What if the apparent diversity of creation is simply different expressions of the same fundamental pattern viewed from different perspectives, or manifesting at different scales. The forbidden fruit of knowledge. Despite its widespread appearance across ancient cultures, detailed knowledge of the flower of life's mathematical properties and metaphysical significance was often carefully guarded. In Egypt, where some of the most perfect renderings of this symbol appear, notably at the Temple of Osiris in Abydos, such geometric knowledge was considered the province of initiates, those who had undergone specific preparation to receive and properly utilize this information. Why might this be? What power could a geometric pattern hold that would necessitate such protection? The Hermetic and Gnostic traditions suggest that the flower of life contains the mathematical keys to creation itself, that one who fully comprehends these patterns gains insight into the very processes by which consciousness manifests as reality. Such knowledge, they believed, carried profound responsibility, as it could be used either for harmonious co-creation or for manipulation of natural forces. In the Gnostic understanding, particularly, the flower of life represents what they termed the divine blueprint, the structural framework through which the demiurge, the creator of the physical world, manifested the material universe. By understanding this blueprint, the Gnostic initiate could potentially transcend the limitations of material existence and reconnect with the higher dimensional realities beyond physical form. The living matrix. Beyond its mathematical properties, the flower of life can be understood as a living energy matrix, a template not just for physical forms, but for the flow of life force or prana through all systems. The intersections of circles create energy nodes, comparable to the concept of marma points in Ayurvedic tradition, or acupuncture points in Chinese medicine, while the circles themselves form channels through which vital energy circulates. This perspective helps explain why the flower of life pattern appears in the energy fields around living organisms when observed through certain forms of Kirlian photography or other subtle energy detection methods. What if this pattern represents not just a symbolic template, but the actual energetic structure that supports and informs physical manifestation? In theosophical terms, this might correspond to what Blavatsky described as the etheric template, the subtle energy pattern that precedes and shapes physical form. Modern systems theorists and some quantum physicists have proposed similar concepts of morphic fields or quantum information fields that organize energy into coherent systems. The holographic principle. One of the most profound aspects of the flower of life is its holographic nature. Each part contains information about the whole. This reflects the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, as within, so without, suggesting that the same patterns repeat at different scales throughout the cosmos. This holographic quality can be observed mathematically in how smaller sections of the flower of life contain the same relational properties as the entire pattern. It also manifests in how the pattern can be extended infinitely outward or explored infinitely inward, with new levels of complexity emerging at each scale while maintaining the same fundamental relationships. Modern physics has proposed a similar concept called the holographic principle, suggesting that all the information contained within a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary surface. Some theoretical physicists have even suggested that our three-dimensional reality may be a projection of information encoded on a two-dimensional surface, a concept strikingly reminiscent of ancient mystical understandings of the flower of life as a two-dimensional representation of multidimensional reality. What if your own consciousness operates according to this same holographic principle? What if each thought, each experience, each moment of awareness contains, in fractal form, the pattern of your entire being? How might recognizing this change your relationship to seemingly insignificant moments or apparently isolated aspects of your experience? Meditating on the flower of life. The flower of life serves not only as an intellectual concept, but as a powerful tool for meditation and consciousness expansion. Various traditions have utilized this symbol as a yantra, visual meditation device, to align individual consciousness with universal creative principles. When meditating upon this pattern, one might begin by perceiving it as a static geometric form, but with sustained attention, many practitioners report experiencing it as dynamic, pulsing, rotating, or even three-dimensionally expanding. Some describe sensing energy flows along the lines connecting the circles or perceiving light emanating from the intersection points. More profound still are reports of the boundary between observer and observed dissolving, of experiencing oneself not as separate from the pattern, but as an expression of it. This corresponds to what Gnostic traditions describe as remembering one's true nature as an emanation of the same creative intelligence that structures all reality. To experiment with this yourself, find or create a clear image of the flower of life. Sit comfortably with a relaxed but alert posture and allow your gaze to rest gently on the center of the pattern. Without straining or forcing, simply remain present with the image, allowing your perception to naturally evolve. You might silently inquire, how is this pattern expressing itself through my own being? How does my consciousness reflect this same geometric intelligence? What aspects of this universal template are uniquely expressed through my individual existence? The flower of life in sound and movement. The geometric relationships encoded in the flower of life translate directly into the harmonic ratios that create consonant sound. The distances between circle centers correspond to the frequency relationships of the musical scale. This is why, in many traditions, sacred geometry and sacred sound are considered two expressions of the same creative principle. When the flower of life pattern is set into motion, rotated around its central axis, it generates spiraling vortex patterns that correspond to the toroidal energy fields observed around all living systems, from cells to planets. These dynamic expressions of the static pattern reveal how sacred geometry informs not just structure, but process, not just form, but flow. Some contemporary researchers have suggested that certain ancient temple complexes were designed according to flower of life proportions, specifically to generate acoustic environments that would induce altered states of consciousness. The resonant frequencies created within these sacred spaces, they propose, would entrain the human energy field to the same geometric proportions, facilitating experiences of expanded awareness and cosmic connectivity. Could it be that when we expose ourselves to environments structured according to these sacred proportions, whether through architecture, sound, or visual art, we are literally aligning our own energetic patterns with the fundamental blueprint of creation? What implications might this have for conscious design of our living and working spaces? The fruit of life and Metatron's cube. Within the flower of life lies another significant pattern called the fruit of life, formed by connecting the centers of 13 circles arranged in a perfect hexagonal pattern. This 13-circle configuration represents a state of completed manifestation, with the number 13 signifying transformation and rebirth in many mystical systems. When lines are drawn connecting all centers of the circles in the fruit of life, a complex geometric figure emerges known as Metatron's cube, named after the archangel Metatron, who in various mystical traditions is associated with the divine architecture of physical reality. This figure contains within its structure the projections of all 5 Platonic solids simultaneously, a remarkable feat of geometric elegance that we will explore more fully in our next chapter. The progression from flower of life to fruit of life to Metatron's cube represents the transition from potential to manifestation, from the blueprint of possibility to the actualized structures of physical reality. It is, in essence, the geometric expression of how thought becomes form, how consciousness crystallizes into matter, living in alignment with the pattern. As we conclude our exploration of the flower of life, I invite you to consider how this pattern might inform your daily existence. If indeed this geometry represents a fundamental template of creation, then aligning our thoughts, actions, and creations with its principles might allow us to live in greater harmony with the natural order. Notice how the flower of life embodies both structure and flow, both individuality and interconnection. Each circle maintains its perfect integrity while participating in a larger pattern of relationship. No circle dominates, none is subservient. Each is essential to the whole, yet the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. What if human society were organized according to similar principles? What if our economic, political, and social systems reflected this same balance of individual expression and collective harmony? What if our relationship with the natural world honored the intricate interconnections represented in this ancient pattern? On a personal level, you might consider, how can I maintain my individual integrity while recognizing my inseparability from the whole? How can my creative expressions align with the same principles that inform universal creation? How might I structure my daily routines, my living space, my relationships to reflect this sacred geometry? For in recognizing and aligning with these patterns, we begin to live not in opposition to the cosmic order, but as conscious expressions of it, not as separate entities imposing our will upon the world, but as aware participants in the ongoing geometric unfoldment of consciousness into form. As we transition to our next chapter, we will delve deeper into the manifestation of these two-dimensional patterns into three-dimensional form through the study of Metatron's cube and the Platonic solids, the fundamental building blocks of physical reality. Yet even as we explore these more concrete expressions, remember that they all emerge from the comprehensive template we have examined here, the flower of life, the interconnected blueprint of existence. Chapter 4. Metatron's cube and Platonic solids, the building blocks of matter and consciousness. Having explored the two-dimensional templates of creation in the seed and flower of life, we now venture into the realm of three-dimensional form through the mystical construct known as Metatron's cube and its contained Platonic solids. This transition from plane to space represents a crucial threshold in understanding how geometric principles manifest as physical reality, and potentially how consciousness itself structures both matter and experience. The emergence of Metatron's cube. Metatron's cube emerges from the flower of life pattern, when lines are drawn connecting the centers of the 13 circles that form the fruit of life configuration. The resulting figure, a complex network of intersecting lines forming a symmetrical three-dimensional projection on a two-dimensional surface, is named after the archangel Metatron, who in various mystical traditions serves as the scribe of God and overseer of the divine architecture of creation. In Kabbalistic teachings, Metatron is described as the highest of the archangels, standing as the celestial scribe who records all that transpires in the universe. His name numerologically corresponds to the divine name Shaddai, Almighty, and he is sometimes identified with Enoch, who in biblical accounts was taken by God and transformed into an angelic being. This association suggests a bridge between human and divine consciousness, between finite perception and infinite awareness. What makes this geometric form so significant that it would be associated with such an exalted spiritual entity? The answer lies in what this structure contains. Within Metatron's cube can be found the three-dimensional projections of all 5 Platonic solids, the only perfectly regular polyhedra possible in our three-dimensional space, and according to Platonic and Pythagorean philosophy, the fundamental building blocks of physical reality. The 5 Platonic solids. Elemental forms. The Platonic solids are unique three-dimensional forms in which all faces are identical regular polygons, with the same number of faces meeting at each vertex. Only 5 such forms are mathematically possible. 1. The tetrahedron, a 4-faced solid with equilateral triangular faces, associated in ancient systems with the element of fire. 2. The hexahedron, cube, a 6-faced solid with square faces, associated with the element of earth. 3. The octahedron, an 8-faced solid with equilateral triangular faces, associated with the element of air. 4. The dodecahedron, a 12-faced solid with pentagonal faces, associated with the element of ether or spirit. 5. The icosahedron, a 20-faced solid with equilateral triangular faces, associated with the element of water. These forms were not arbitrarily assigned elemental correspondences by ancient philosophers. Rather, their geometric properties were understood to embody the essential qualities of the elements they represent. The sharp, ascending form of the tetrahedron embodies the piercing, transformative nature of fire. The stable structure of the cube reflects the solidity and permanence of earth. The expansive yet balanced octahedron captures the omnidirectional quality of air. The flowing, adaptive nature of water finds expression in the icosahedron's many triangular faces. And the dodecahedron, with its pentagonal faces mirroring the five-fold symmetry found throughout living systems, was considered the container of life force itself, what the ancients termed quintessence, or ether. What if these associations are not merely poetic metaphors, but reflect actual structural correspondences between geometric form and energetic quality? What if the elements themselves, the fundamental states of matter and energy, are expressions of these geometric archetypes operating at different frequencies or densities? The mathematical miracle. From a purely mathematical perspective, the Platonic solids represent a remarkable phenomenon. Despite the infinite variety of three-dimensional forms possible, only these five satisfy the criteria of perfect regularity, where all faces, edges, and angles are identical. This mathematical uniqueness led Plato and the Pythagoreans to conclude that these forms must represent fundamental principles in the structure of reality itself. Even more astonishing is the fact that these five forms share intricate mathematical relationships with one another. They can nest within each other in various configurations, transform into one another through geometric operations, and combine to create more complex polyhedra that maintain their harmonic proportions. The dodecahedron and icosahedron, for instance, are dual polyhedra, meaning the vertices of one correspond to the face centers of the other, and vice versa. These interrelationships suggest a unified geometric system, a coherent language through which complexity emerges from simplicity while maintaining harmonic proportion. Is it any wonder that Johannes Kepler, in his search for the mathematical harmony of the cosmos, initially modeled the orbits of the planets as nested Platonic solids? Though his specific model was eventually superseded, his intuition about geometric harmony underlying cosmic structure has been validated by contemporary understandings of vibrational physics and resonant systems. From macro to micro, the universal applicability. The significance of the Platonic solids extends from the macrocosmic to the microcosmic scale. At the largest level, certain galactic structures appear to organize according to dodecahedral or icosahedral symmetry. On the planetary scale, the ancient geomantic system known as Earth's planetary grid maps significant energetic junctions and geological formations according to a combination of dodecahedral and icosahedral frameworks. At the microscopic level, many viruses form icosahedral capsids, protein shells, while numerous crystals grow according to the symmetry principles of various Platonic solids. Even more fundamentally, certain atomic and molecular structures conform to these same geometric patterns, as do the orbital patterns of electrons in some elements. Perhaps most intriguing are recent theories in quantum physics, suggesting that the fundamental fabric of space-time itself may be structured according to geometric principles consistent with Platonic symmetries. Some models of quantum gravity propose that space at the Planck scale, the smallest measurable unit, may be organized as a network of interconnected tetrahedra, a three-dimensional fractal lattice that gives rise to the apparently smooth continuum we experience at larger scales. What if the same geometric principles operate at all scales of existence? What if the structures of galaxies, planets, organisms, cells, molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles are not merely similar by coincidence, but represent the same fundamental patterns expressing at different frequencies or densities of manifestation? Beyond physical form, Platonic solids as states of consciousness. In the Hermetic and Neoplatonic traditions, the Platonic solids were understood not merely as physical forms, but as expressions of archetypal principles that structure consciousness itself. Each solid was associated not only with an element, but with a state of awareness or mode of perception. The tetrahedron, simplest of the Platonic solids, corresponds to the penetrating insight that cuts through illusion to perceive essence, the fire of intellect that transforms understanding. The cube represents grounded, practical consciousness that organizes experience into stable, usable frameworks. The octahedron embodies balanced awareness that perceives relationships and connections between apparently separate phenomena. The icosahedron correlates with fluid, adaptive consciousness that flows with change while maintaining internal coherence. and the dodecahedron represents integrative awareness that perceives the unifying patterns behind diverse manifestations. These correspondences suggest that the geometry of consciousness itself might follow the same principles that structure physical reality. What if our various states of awareness, from ordinary waking consciousness to profound meditative states, from focused analytical thinking to expansive creative insight, represent different geometric configurations of the same fundamental awareness? Some meditation traditions explicitly work with visualizations of these forms as means of accessing specific qualities of consciousness. By internally generating the tetrahedron, for instance, one might cultivate penetrating insight. By holding the dodecahedral form in awareness, one might access more integrative, holistic perception. Have you ever noticed how certain states of consciousness seem to have distinct geometric qualities? How some insights feel sharp and pointed like the tetrahedron, while others feel expansive and all-encompassing like the dodecahedron? What if these subjective impressions reflect actual geometric configurations in your field of awareness? Metatron's cube as a meditation tool. Beyond intellectual understanding, Metatron's cube serves as a powerful template for meditation and consciousness. Expansion. By contemplating this form, either visually or through visualization, one can potentially access the creative principles that structure both matter and mind. Begin by gazing at an image of Metatron's cube, allowing your perception to gradually shift from seeing it as a flat, two-dimensional drawing to perceiving the three-dimensional forms contained within it. Without forcing or straining, simply remain open to how the image appears to transform as you observe it. Many practitioners report that with sustained attention, the different Platonic solids begin to emerge visually from the complex network of lines, appearing to float, rotate, or transform into one another. Some experience synesthetic phenomena, such as sounds associated with specific geometric configurations or sensations of movement through dimensional thresholds. More profound still are reports of the boundary between observer and observed dissolving, of experiencing oneself not as separate from these geometric forms, but as an expression of the same creative intelligence that structures them. This corresponds to what some mystical traditions describe as remembering one's true nature as a multidimensional being whose consciousness extends beyond physical limitation. The dodecahedron, container of consciousness. Of the 5 Platonic solids, the dodecahedron holds particular significance in many esoteric systems. With its 12 pentagonal faces, it embodies the 5-fold symmetry prevalent throughout living systems, from the structure of many flowers and fruits to the proportions of the human body. The number 12 itself carries profound symbolic weight across traditions. 12 zodiac signs, 12 months, 12 disciples, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 Olympian gods. Plato himself, in his dialogue Timaeus, associates the dodecahedron with the cosmos as a whole, stating that God used this solid for the whole universe, embroidering figures on it. In some interpretations of Plato's cosmology, the other 4 solids represent the elements that compose the material world, while the dodecahedron represents the container or framework within which these elements interact, the structure of space itself. This conception finds a striking parallel in certain interpretations of quantum field theory, which propose that the apparently empty space of the quantum vacuum may actually be structured according to principles consistent with dodecahedral geometry. Some cosmological models even suggest that the large-scale structure of the universe may follow a dodecahedral pattern, a possibility supported by certain analyses of cosmic microwave background radiation. In more mystical interpretations, particularly those found in Gnostic and Hermetic texts, the dodecahedron represents the structure of what might be termed consciousness space, the geometric framework within which awareness itself operates. The 12 pentagonal faces are associated with 12 primary modes of perception or windows through which consciousness can view reality. Metatron's cube and dimensional interfaces. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Metatron's cube is its function as what some esoteric traditions call a dimensional interface, a geometric structure that mediates between different orders or frequencies of reality. The fact that it represents three-dimensional forms projected onto a two-dimensional surface makes it a visual representation of dimensional translation. This quality has led some researchers to propose that Metatron's cube might serve as a template for understanding how higher dimensional information projects into our three-dimensional experience, a geometric model for how consciousness, potentially existing beyond the constraints of space and time, interfaces with physical reality. In certain mystical traditions, particularly those influenced by Kabbalistic thought, Metatron's cube is described as the pattern through which divine creative energy steps down its frequency to manifest as physical form, a cosmic transformer that modulates infinite potential into finite expression. This concept finds interesting parallels in contemporary theories of holographic physics, which propose that our three-dimensional reality may be a projection of information encoded on a two-dimensional boundary, a concept remarkably similar to ancient understandings of Metatron's cube as a two-dimensional template generating three-dimensional manifestation. Sacred geometry and DNA, the blueprint of life. One of the most fascinating applications of these geometric principles appears in the structure of DNA, the molecular blueprint that encodes the information necessary for building and maintaining living organisms. The double helix structure of DNA follows precise geometric proportions that reflect the same harmonic relationships found in the Platonic solids and their projections in Metatron's cube. The DNA molecule completes a full turn every 34 angstroms, with 10 base pairs per turn. These numbers correspond to ratios found in the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean proportion, the same mathematical relationships embedded in the geometry of the Platonic solids, particularly the dodecahedron and icosahedron. Moreover, when the DNA double helix is viewed end-on, its cross-section reveals a decagonal, 10-sided structure that relates directly to the pentagonal symmetry of the dodecahedron. Some researchers have even identified geometric patterns in the arrangement of the four nucleotide bases, A, T, G, C, that correspond to specific configurations found in Metatron's cube. What if DNA is not merely a biochemical storage system, but a crystallized geometric template, a physical expression of the same mathematical principles encoded in Metatron's cube? What if life itself emerges through the interface between geometric information fields and molecular structures that can receive and express this information? Living the geometry. As we conclude our exploration of Metatron's cube and the Platonic solids, I invite you to consider how these geometric principles might manifest in your own experience. Beyond intellectual understanding, how might awareness of these forms influence your perception and interaction with reality? You might begin by simply noticing the prevalence of these geometric patterns in your environment, from the cubic structure of salt crystals to the pentagonal symmetry of many flowers, from the hexagonal honeycomb to the spiral growth patterns of shells and plants. As you recognize these forms in the world around you, consider that you are not merely observing random patterns, but glimpsing expressions of the same fundamental geometric intelligence that structures all of creation. More subtly, you might become aware of how different states of consciousness seem to embody the qualities associated with different Platonic solids. Notice when your awareness feels sharp and penetrating like the tetrahedron, stable and grounded like the cube, balanced and relational like the octahedron, fluid and adaptive like the icosahedron, or integrative and harmonizing like the dodecahedron. Some practitioners work deliberately with these forms as tools for cultivating specific qualities of consciousness. Through visualization, movement practices, or creation of physical models, they engage with these geometric archetypes to activate corresponding states of awareness. Could your own spiritual or personal development be supported by conscious engagement with these forms? For in recognizing and aligning with these patterns, we begin to perceive not just the outer forms of reality, but the inner geometric principles that generate them. And in this recognition lies a profound opportunity to participate consciously in the same creative process that structures the cosmos itself. As we move forward in our exploration, we will examine how these three-dimensional forms relate to even more complex patterns of proportion and relationship through the study of the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence, the mathematical expressions of harmony and balanced growth that pervade both natural systems and conscious design. Chapter 5: The Golden Ratio and Fibonacci Sequence: Divine Proportion in Nature and Art. Having explored the fundamental geometric forms that structure three-dimensional space, we now turn our attention to a mathematical relationship so profound in its implications and so ubiquitous in its manifestations that it has been called divine proportion. The golden ratio and its close relative, the Fibonacci sequence. These interrelated mathematical principles reveal how growth, harmony, and beauty emerge through balanced relationship rather than arbitrary design. The mathematics of harmony. The golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi, Ph, is an irrational number approximately equal to 1.6 Esoteric. Like pi, it cannot be expressed as a simple fraction, suggesting its transcendent nature. Mathematically, it is defined as a proportion in which the ratio of the sum of two quantities to the larger quantity is equal to the ratio of the larger quantity to the smaller one. Expressed algebraically, or a plus b, or a or a, b or orth. When this relationship exists, the resulting proportion creates what has been empirically observed to be the most aesthetically pleasing relationship between different dimensions. A rectangle with sides in the ratio of 1:1. 618, known as a golden rectangle, has been found across cultures and throughout history to be inherently satisfying to human perception. But why should a specific mathematical ratio appear inherently beautiful to human consciousness? What if this aesthetic preference is not arbitrary or culturally conditioned, but reflects an innate recognition of a fundamental pattern that structures reality itself? The Fibonacci sequence, named after the 13th century Italian mathematician Leonardo of Pisa, known as Fibonacci, provides a numerical approach to the golden ratio. The sequence begins with 0 and 1, and each subsequent number is the sum of the two preceding ones: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. What makes this sequence remarkable is that as it progresses, the ratio between consecutive Fibonacci numbers approaches the golden ratio with increasing accuracy. By the time we reach the higher numbers in the sequence, the ratio is virtually indistinguishable from F. This convergence suggests a profound relationship between discrete, countable phenomena, represented by the Fibonacci numbers, and continuous proportion, represented by F, between the quantized nature of material manifestation and the flowing continuum of underlying pattern. The spiral of creation. When the golden ratio, or Fibonacci sequence, is expressed geometrically, it generates the logarithmic spiral, a growth pattern in which each turn of the spiral is proportionally wider than the previous one according to the golden ratio. Unlike the regular spiral that expands at a constant rate, the logarithmic or golden spiral expands exponentially, creating a pattern of growth that maintains the same proportional relationship regardless of scale. This spiral appears throughout nature, in the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower head, in the unfurling of fern fronds, in the structure of pine cones and pineapples, in the spiral arms of galaxies, in the curl of ocean waves, and perhaps most famously, in the chambers of the nautilus shell. It represents a pattern of growth that is simultaneously efficient, balanced, and beautiful, allowing maximum exposure to light, optimal packing of seeds, or ideal distribution of pressure. What is remarkable about this spiral is not merely its prevalence, but its mathematical elegance. It embodies what mathematicians call self-similarity, the property of looking the same at different scales. Zoom in or out on a logarithmic spiral, and its proportional relationships remain constant. This quality of scale invariance is a hallmark of fractal geometry and suggests a pattern that transcends specific material manifestations to express a more fundamental principle of harmonious growth. Have you ever noticed how certain natural forms seem inherently pleasing, even without being able to articulate why? Could it be that we instinctively recognize the golden ratio as a signature of life's intelligent unfolding, a visual confirmation that the universe operates according to principles of harmony rather than chaos. Divine proportion in the human form. Perhaps nowhere is the presence of the golden ratio more personally relevant than in the proportions of the human body. From the relationship between different bones in your fingers, to the proportions of your facial features, from the spiral pattern of hair growth, to the helical structure of DNA, the human form embodies this divine proportion in countless ways. The Renaissance artist and mathematician Leonardo da Vinci extensively studied these proportions, as illustrated in his famous drawing, Vitruvian Man. He observed that in the ideally proportioned human body, the ratio of total height to the distance from the soles to the navel is F. The ratio of the distance from the fingertips to the elbow compared to the distance from the wrist to the elbow is F. The ratio of the height of the face to the width of the face is F. The ratio of the distance between the lips and the nose compared to the distance between the eyebrows and the nose is F. These proportional relationships extend to the microscopic level as well. The spiral arrangement of the cochlea in the inner ear follows the golden spiral, as does the pattern of neural networks in the brain. Even the molecular structure of our DNA exhibits proportional relationships consistent with the golden ratio. What might it mean that our bodies are constructed according to the same proportional principles that govern the growth of plants, the formation of galaxies, and the resonance of musical harmonies? What if our physical form is not arbitrary, but represents a specific geometric template designed to interface optimally with the proportional patterns that structure reality itself? Consciousness and proportion. Beyond physical manifestations, some researchers have suggested that the golden ratio may play a role in the structure of consciousness itself. Certain brainwave patterns, particularly those associated with meditative states and creative insight, exhibit frequency relationships that approximate the golden ratio. When the brain processes visual information that embodies this proportion, distinctive patterns of neural activity emerge that differ from those generated by other proportional relationships. This has led some theorists to propose that the golden ratio may represent an optimal relationship for information processing, a proportion that allows for maximum efficiency in the organization and integration of complex data. If consciousness itself operates according to principles of harmony and proportion, might the golden ratio represent a kind of resonant frequency for awareness? In certain mystical traditions, particularly those influenced by Pythagorean and Platonic thought, the experience of beauty is understood not as a subjective preference, but as the recognition of divine proportion manifesting in form. When we perceive something as beautiful, these traditions suggest we are not merely having an aesthetic experience, but glimpsing the underlying mathematical harmony of creation. What if beauty itself is not arbitrary or merely cultural, but represents the resonance between the proportional patterns in our consciousness and the same patterns expressed in the world around us? What if the experience of beauty is a form of recognition, a moment of alignment between inner and outer expressions of the same divine proportion? The Fibonacci sequence in time. While we often think of the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence in spatial terms, these same proportional relationships can structure temporal experiences as well. Musical compositions that embody these proportions, where the climax occurs at approximately 61.8% of the total duration, or where the relationship between different movements follows Fibonacci numbers, often create a sense of natural flow and satisfying resolution. Some composers have consciously incorporated these proportions into their work. Claude Debussy, for instance, frequently structured his compositions according to golden ratio relationships, creating what many listeners experience as a perfect balance between anticipation and fulfillment. Similar proportional relationships appear in the works of Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach, suggesting an intuitive recognition of these harmonic principles. Beyond music, similar temporal patterns appear in the rhythm of heartbeats, where the relationship between systole and diastole approximates the golden ratio, in the cycles of brainwaves during meditation, and in the temporal structure of natural processes from the blooming of flowers to the development of embryos. What if our experience of time itself, our sense of rhythm, pace, and appropriate duration is influenced by these same proportional relationships? What if the feeling of a perfect moment or a natural flow, represents alignment with these universal patterns of temporal harmony. The golden ratio and the Platonic solids. The golden ratio is intimately connected with the Platonic solids we explored in the previous chapter, particularly the dodecahedron and icosahedron. The pentagonal faces of the dodecahedron embody multiple golden ratio relationships, while the proportions between different dimensions of both solids correspond to F. This connection suggests a coherent mathematical system underlying the geometric expressions we've been exploring, a unified language of proportion that manifests through both two-dimensional and three-dimensional forms. The golden ratio serves as a kind of bridge between different geometric expressions, revealing their fundamental unity despite apparent diversity. In the Platonic and Pythagorean traditions, this mathematical coherence was understood as evidence of divine intelligence operating through number and proportion. The golden ratio, in particular, was seen as a mathematical expression of the principle of unity in diversity, the harmonious relationship between the one and the many that structures all levels of reality, sacred architecture and intentional design. Throughout human history, architects and designers have incorporated the golden ratio into sacred structures, from the proportions of the Great Pyramid at Giza to the dimensions of the Parthenon in Athens, from the layout of Gothic cathedrals to the design of Buddhist temples. These buildings were not merely aesthetic achievements, but were understood as physical embodiments of cosmic principles, three-dimensional expressions of the mathematical harmony that structures the universe. By creating spaces that embodied these proportions, ancient architects sought to establish resonance between the built environment and the natural order, to create containers that would align human consciousness with divine proportion. Entering such spaces, one experiences not merely visual beauty, but a kind of mathematical harmony that affects consciousness in subtle yet profound ways. Contemporary research has begun to validate these ancient practices, demonstrating that environments designed according to golden ratio proportions can influence psychological states, cognitive function, and even physiological processes like heart rate variability and brainwave patterns. What was once considered mystical or superstitious is increasingly understood as an intuitive recognition of how geometric proportion affects consciousness. You might consider, how do different environments affect your state of awareness? Have you noticed how certain spaces seem to naturally induce calm, focus, or expansiveness? Could these effects be related to the proportional relationships embodied in their design? Practical applications. Living in harmony with divine proportion. Beyond theoretical understanding, how might awareness of the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence inform your daily life and creative expression? Here are some practical applications to consider. 1. Environmental design. Arrange your living or working space according to golden ratio proportions, from the dimensions of furniture to the placement of objects relative to each other. Notice how these arrangements affect your sense of harmony and well-being. 2. Creative expression. Whether in visual art, music, writing, or other creative forms, experiment with incorporating golden ratio proportions. Place key elements or transitions at approximately 61.8% of the total composition and observe how this affects the flow and impact of your creation. 3. Natural attunement. Spend time observing and contemplating natural forms that embody the golden spiral. From seashells to flower patterns, from the branching of trees to the swirl of galaxies in astronomical photographs. Allow your perception to recognize these harmonious patterns and feel the resonance they create. 4. Temporal harmony. Structure your daily rhythms and activities with awareness of proportional relationship. Rather than dividing time into equal segments, experiment with Fibonacci proportions, perhaps dedicating time to different activities in ratios of 5.8 or 8:13, and notice how this affects your experience of flow and productivity. 5. Meditative contemplation. Create or obtain a visual representation of the golden spiral or Fibonacci sequence. Use this as a focus for meditation, allowing your awareness to follow the proportional unfoldment, and notice how this affects your state of consciousness. The living mathematics. As we conclude our exploration of the golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence, I invite you to consider these mathematical relationships, not as abstract concepts, but as living principles that inform both the structure of reality and your experience of it. The divine proportion represents not merely a number, but a quality of relationship, a balance between unity and diversity, between stability and growth, between the known and the unknown. In recognizing these patterns, we begin to perceive not just isolated phenomena, but the coherent mathematical language that connects them. And in this recognition lies a profound opportunity to align our own creative expression, our environments, and ultimately our consciousness with the same proportional harmony that structures the cosmos itself. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the golden ratio is that it cannot be reduced to a simple fraction. Its irrational nature means that it can be approached ever more closely, but never perfectly captured in finite terms. In this, it mirrors the relationship between human consciousness and divine understanding, an asymptotic approach to truth that grows ever more precise without reaching ultimate conclusion. As we move forward in our exploration, we will examine how these principles of proportion and harmony manifest through vibration and sound, how the geometric patterns we've been studying express not only as static forms, but as dynamic frequencies that shape both matter and consciousness. Chapter 6: Geometry, Sound and Vibration, Cymatics and the Shape of Frequency. We have explored the static expressions of sacred geometry, the points, lines, circles and solids that form the structural framework of reality. Now we venture into the dynamic realm where geometry expresses through movement, where mathematical relationships manifest as vibration, and where frequency takes visible form. This is the domain of cymatics, the study of how sound shapes matter, and it reveals perhaps the most profound insight of sacred geometry. That form itself is frozen frequency, the vibrational universe. At the foundation of both ancient wisdom traditions and contemporary physics lies a revolutionary understanding. Everything in existence is, at its core, vibration. From the densest matter to the most subtle thought, from the smallest subatomic particle to the largest galactic structure, all can be understood as vibrational phenomena occurring at different frequencies and amplitudes. Quantum physics describes subatomic particles not as solid objects, but as probability waves, vibrational patterns in quantum fields. String theory proposes that the fundamental constituents of reality are not point-like particles, but tiny vibrating strings, whose different modes of vibration give rise to different particles and forces. Even what appears as solid matter is, upon closer examination, mostly empty space populated by vibrational energy patterns. This scientific perspective finds remarkable resonance with ancient mystical declarations. The opening of the Gospel of John, "In the beginning was the Word, Logos," can be understood as stating that vibration or sound preceded material manifestation. The Hindu concept of Nada Brahma, the world is sound, similarly proposes that the universe itself is a kind of music, a symphony of vibrations manifesting across multiple dimensions. What if these ancient intuitions and modern scientific theories are converging on the same fundamental truth? What if reality itself is fundamentally vibrational, with apparently solid forms representing specific frequency patterns temporarily stabilized into coherent structures? Sound made visible. The science of cymatics. The term cymatics was coined by Swiss scientist Hans Jenny in the 1960s, though the phenomenon it describes has been observed throughout history. Cymatics demonstrates how sound vibrations organize matter into geometric patterns that directly correspond to the sound's frequency and amplitude. In a typical cymatics experiment, fine particles, such as sand or salt, are placed on a plate or membrane, which is then vibrated by sound. As the frequency changes, the particles reorganize themselves into different geometric patterns, from simple concentric circles at lower frequencies to increasingly complex mandala-like forms at higher frequencies. These patterns are not random, but represent the mathematical nodes and antinodes created by the standing waves of the sound vibration. What makes these experiments so profound is that they provide visible evidence of an invisible organizing principle. The geometric patterns that emerge are not imposed from outside, but represent the inherent mathematical relationships within the sound frequencies themselves. Different musical notes consistently produce specific geometric forms, regardless of the material being vibrated or the person conducting the experiment. Even more remarkably, these cymatic patterns bear striking resemblances to forms found throughout nature and sacred art, from the symmetrical structures of snowflakes to the mandalas of Eastern spiritual traditions, from the patterns of flower petals to the geometric designs in sacred architecture. What if these natural and artistic forms are not coincidentally similar to cymatic patterns, but represent the same vibrational principles manifesting in different contexts? The geometry of musical harmony. The relationship between sound and geometry extends beyond visible somatic patterns to the mathematical structure of musical harmony itself. The Pythagoreans discovered that harmonious musical intervals correspond to simple mathematical ratios between string lengths. The octave, the most fundamental harmonic relationship, corresponds to a ratio of 1.2. The perfect fifth corresponds to a ratio of 2.3. The perfect fourth corresponds to a ratio of 3.4. These same proportional relationships appear in the geometric forms we've been exploring, in the relationships between different elements of the Platonic solids, in the proportions of the golden ratio, and in the structure of the flower of life pattern. This suggests that musical harmony and geometric harmony are different expressions of the same mathematical principles. In many ancient traditions, this correspondence between sound and form was not considered coincidental but essential, different manifestations of a unified cosmic order. The Sanskrit concept of nada, sound, and bindu, point, expresses this understanding. Sound and form are complementary expressions of the same creative principle. Have you ever noticed how certain pieces of music seem to create specific shapes or spaces in your awareness? How some musical progressions feel angular, while others feel circular or spiral? What if these subjective impressions reflect actual geometric configurations generated by the sound frequencies in your consciousness? The human instrument, resonance and form. The human body itself can be understood as a complex vibrational instrument. Different tissues and organs have their own resonant frequencies, and the body as a whole represents a symphony of interrelated vibrational systems. When we experience sound, we don't merely hear it with our ears. Our entire physical structure resonates with its frequencies. Ancient healing traditions recognized this principle and developed sophisticated systems of sound healing based on the understanding that specific tones could restore harmonic balance to different aspects of the physical and subtle body. In Tibetan medicine, singing bowls producing specific frequencies were placed on or near different parts of the body to re-establish their optimal vibrational patterns. In Egyptian healing temples, specially designed acoustic chambers were used to immerse patients in specific sound frequencies. Contemporary research has begun to validate these ancient practices, demonstrating that different sound frequencies can indeed affect biological processes from cellular metabolism to brainwave patterns. Some studies have shown that exposure to specific sound frequencies can alter gene expression, influence immune function, and even affect the crystalline structure of water within the body. What if health itself represents a state of harmonic vibrational coherence, while disease represents distortions or disruptions in these optimal frequency patterns? What if the ancient practice of sound healing was not merely symbolic or psychological, but represented a sophisticated understanding of the human body as a vibrational system? Sacred syllables, the geometry of mantras. In many spiritual traditions, certain sounds or syllables are considered sacred, not merely as symbolic representations, but as actual vibrational keys that can affect consciousness and even physical reality. The Sanskrit syllable om, or aum, the Hebrew tetragrammaton, yhvh, and various other sacred sounds were understood as fundamental vibrations that could align human consciousness with cosmic principles. What makes these particular sounds significant? Research into the acoustic properties of these sacred syllables has revealed that many of them generate particularly coherent and complex cymatic patterns when vocalized correctly. The Sanskrit syllable Om, for instance, produces a pattern remarkably similar to the Sri Yantra, an ancient geometric mandala representing the union of masculine and feminine cosmic principles. Some traditions teach that these sacred sounds should be not merely heard, but felt, experienced as vibrational phenomena throughout the body and energy field. Through correct pronunciation and focused attention, the practitioner aims to embody the geometric pattern associated with the sound, creating a state of resonance between individual consciousness and universal principles. Have you ever experienced how certain sounds seem to resonate in specific areas of your body? How some tones feel centered in the chest, others in the throat, others in the head? What if these subjective locations of resonance correspond to actual geometric nodes created by standing wave patterns in your physical and subtle anatomy? The architecture of resonance. Throughout history, sacred spaces have been designed with precise acoustic properties that generate specific vibrational environments. From the perfect acoustics of Greek amphitheaters to the otherworldly resonance of Gothic cathedrals, from the whispering galleries of Islamic architecture to the sonic chambers of ancient Egyptian temples, these structures were created not merely for aesthetic or practical purposes, but to establish specific vibrational fields that would affect consciousness. Many of these spaces were designed according to the same geometric principles we've been exploring, incorporating the golden ratio, Platonic solid proportions, and other sacred geometric relationships into their acoustic design. The result is architecture that not only embodies sacred geometry visually, but expresses it sonically, creating immersive vibrational environments that entrain the human energy field to specific frequency patterns. Recent acoustic analysis of spaces like Newgrange in Ireland, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and Chartres Cathedral in France has revealed that many of them amplify or dampen specific frequency ranges, often those that correspond to brainwave states associated with meditation, visionary experience, or heightened awareness. Some generate standing wave patterns that create specific geometric energy configurations within the space. What if these architectural achievements were not merely impressive engineering feats, but technologies of consciousness, structures specifically designed to generate vibrational environments that would facilitate particular states of awareness or energetic alignment? The harmonics of creation. In both ancient cosmologies and some interpretations of string theory, the process of creation itself is described in terms of sound or vibration. The Hindu tradition speaks of Nada Brahma, the primordial sound from which all forms emerge. The Egyptian creation myths describe the god Thoth, associated with divine wisdom, speaking the world into existence. The biblical Genesis states, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' emphasizing the creative power of divine utterance." What if these accounts are not merely poetic metaphors, but intuitive recognitions of a fundamental process, the manifestation of form through vibration? What if the material universe itself represents a kind of frozen sound, vibrational patterns slowed and densified into what we perceive as matter? The science of cymatics demonstrates on a small scale how sound directly organizes matter into coherent geometric patterns. What if this same principle operates at cosmic scales? What if the spiral arms of galaxies, the hexagonal storm patterns on Saturn, the fractal branching of river systems, and countless other natural forms represent cymatic patterns created by vast cosmic vibrations? Some researchers have proposed that what we call the laws of physics might themselves be understood as standing wave patterns in a cosmic medium, stable vibrational configurations that define how energy and matter interact. If this is the case, then the entire universe could be understood as a kind of cymatic pattern generated by what ancient traditions called the word or the primordial sound. Practical applications, working with sound and form. How might understanding the relationship between geometry and sound inform your practical engagement with reality? Here are some applications to consider. 1. Conscious listening. Pay attention to how different sounds and musical pieces affect your state of consciousness and even your physical sensations. Notice if certain tones or frequencies seem to resonate with specific areas of your body or generate particular geometric impressions in your awareness. 2. Sacred sound practice. Experiment with vocalizing traditional sacred syllables like Om, Hu, Amen, or Shalom, with focused attention on their vibrational qualities rather than just their conceptual meanings. Notice how different vocalizations create different sensations and states of consciousness. 3. Space harmonization. Consider the acoustic properties of your living and working environments. Experiment with how different sounds interact with these spaces and how they affect the overall energetic quality. Simple adjustments in room acoustics, through furniture placement, textiles, or resonant objects, can significantly shift the vibrational characteristics of a space. 4. Cymatic exploration. Create simple cymatic experiments using a speaker, a plate, and fine particles like salt or sand. Observe how different frequencies generate different geometric patterns and contemplate the relationship between what you hear and what you see. 5. Vibrational healing. Explore traditions of sound healing that use specific tones to balance and harmonize the human energy system. Tools like tuning forks, singing bowls, or even specific musical compositions can be used to address energetic imbalances and promote coherent vibrational states. The living vibration. As we conclude our exploration of geometry, sound, and vibration, I invite you to consider reality itself as a kind of music made visible, a symphony of interrelated frequencies manifesting as the forms and experiences that constitute your world. From this perspective, the geometric patterns we've been studying are not static structures, but dynamic expressions of vibrational relationships. This understanding transforms how we might approach both spiritual practice and everyday life. If reality is fundamentally vibrational, then consciousness itself can be understood as a kind of attunement, an alignment of personal frequency with specific aspects of the cosmic symphony. Spiritual development becomes not merely a conceptual or moral endeavor, but a process of refining one's vibrational coherence. Similarly, creation, whether artistic, technological, or social, can be approached as a vibrational process. By understanding the geometric principles that underlie harmonious frequency relationships, we can design environments, objects, sounds, and experiences that promote coherence rather than dissonance, that align with rather than disrupt the natural harmonic patterns of life. In the words attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to perform the miracles of one thing. This hermetic axiom takes on new meaning when we recognize that above and below represent not just spatial relationships, but frequency domains, different octaves of the same fundamental vibration expressing through different levels of manifestation. As we move forward in our exploration, we will examine how these principles of vibrational geometry have been incorporated into the design of sacred architecture throughout human history, how the same mathematical relationships that structure sound and form have been used to create spaces that align human consciousness with cosmic principles. Chapter 7. Architectural Harmonics. Sacred Geometry in Ancient Temples and Structures. Having explored how sacred geometric principles manifest through sound and vibration, we now turn our attention to how these same mathematical relationships have been deliberately incorporated into the built environment. Throughout human history, sacred structures, from megalithic stone circles to Gothic cathedrals, from Egyptian pyramids to Hindu temples, have been designed according to precise geometric proportions that mirror the mathematical harmonies we've been exploring. These buildings are not merely symbolic representations of cosmic principles, but functional technologies designed to create specific effects on human consciousness through geometric resonance. The temple as cosmos. In virtually all traditional cultures, sacred architecture was understood not merely as shelter for religious activities, but as a microcosmic reflection of the universal order, a physical embodiment of the same geometric principles that structure reality itself. The Latin term templum originally referred not to a building, but to a sacred space. a carefully measured section of the heavens or earth designated for divine communion. The physical temple was conceived as a three-dimensional map of cosmic principles, oriented according to celestial alignments and proportioned according to sacred ratios. This concept appears across diverse traditions. In Hindu cosmology, the temple represents Mount Meru, the axis mundi, connecting different levels of reality. In Islamic sacred architecture, geometric patterns embody mathematical principles understood as direct expressions of divine unity. In Christian cathedral design, the cruciform layout and proportional systems reflect theological understandings of cosmic order. Despite their apparent differences, these traditions share a fundamental understanding that properly proportioned space can create a resonant field that attunes human consciousness to universal principles. What if these sacred structures were not merely symbolic, but functional, designed to generate specific effects on consciousness through their geometric properties? What if the builders of these temples understood principles of vibrational resonance that modern science is only beginning to rediscover? The mathematics of sacred space. The geometric principles we've explored throughout this book, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the proportions of the Platonic solids, the relationships, encoded in the flower of life, appear with remarkable consistency in sacred architecture across cultures and millennia. These mathematical relationships are incorporated not by chance or merely for aesthetic appeal, but because they were understood to create specific energetic effects. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, whose proportions embody numerous mathematical constants, including P, Pi, and F, Phi. Its perimeter-to-height ratio equals exactly 2p, making the pyramid a perfect representation of the squaring of a circle. Its apothem, the line from the center of the base to the middle of any side, divided by half the base equals f, the golden ratio. These are not approximate values, but precise mathematical relationships, achieved with astonishing accuracy despite the enormous scale of the structure. Similar mathematical precision appears in Greek temples like the Parthenon, whose proportions throughout embody golden ratio relationships, in Gothic cathedrals like Chartres, whose dimensions incorporate multiple sacred ratios and musical harmonic proportions, and in Hindu temples like those at Khajuraho, whose complex geometric layouts are based on cosmic diagrams called mandalas and incorporate precise astronomical alignments. What makes these mathematical relationships significant is not merely their presence, but their consistency across diverse cultures that had no known contact with each other. What if these builders, separated by vast distances in space and time, were all accessing the same fundamental understanding of how geometric proportion affects consciousness and energy? Acoustic architecture, the sound of sacred space. Beyond visual and spatial geometry, many sacred structures incorporate sophisticated acoustic properties that generate specific sonic environments. The relationship between architecture and sound is not incidental, but integral to the function of these spaces as consciousness-altering technologies. Recent acoustic analysis has revealed extraordinary properties in structures like the Great Pyramid, whose king's chamber generates powerful standing wave patterns at specific frequencies, particularly around 116 Hz, a frequency that research has shown can induce altered states of consciousness and stimulate right brain activity associated with intuitive and holistic perception. Similarly, many Gothic cathedrals are designed with precise reverberation times that amplify certain frequencies while dampening others, creating acoustic environments that enhance specific vocal harmonics, particularly those of Gregorian chant. The resulting sound field creates standing wave patterns throughout the cathedral that correspond to the same geometric proportions embodied in the architecture itself, a remarkable alignment of visual and acoustic geometry. Even more ancient structures demonstrate this acoustic sophistication. Newgrange in Ireland, Hypogeum in Malta, and numerous other Neolithic chambers create specific acoustic effects, from infrasound resonances that can alter brainwave patterns to perfect amplification of certain frequency ranges that correspond to altered states of consciousness. What if these acoustic properties were not accidental, but central to the function of these spaces. What if the builders understood that certain sound frequencies, amplified and shaped by specific architectural geometries, could create vibrational environments that facilitated expanded awareness or specific states of consciousness? Orientation and alignment. Cosmic geometry. Beyond internal proportions, sacred structures throughout history have been precisely oriented to astronomical alignments, creating geometric relationships not just within the building itself, but between the structure and cosmic movements. These alignments connect the microcosmic geometry of the building with the macrocosmic geometry of celestial cycles. The most famous example may be Stonehenge, whose layout precisely tracks solar and lunar cycles, including the extreme positions of the moon that repeat only every 18.6 years, a cycle that would require generations of observation to accurately identify. Similarly, many Egyptian temples are aligned to specific stellar events, such as the heliacal rising of Sirius or particular positions of Orion's belt. These alignments create more than symbolic connections to celestial events. At specific times determined by these cosmic geometries, sunlight or moonlight enters the structures in particular ways, illuminating specific features, creating light and shadow patterns that embody sacred proportions, or generating specific energetic effects through the interaction of light with crystalline elements in the stone. The Great Pyramid, for instance, is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree, more precise than the alignment of many modern buildings despite being constructed without contemporary surveying technology. This alignment, combined with the pyramid's precise proportions, creates specific relationships with the Earth's magnetic field and with cosmic radiation patterns. What if these alignments were designed to harness specific energetic qualities associated with particular celestial configurations? What if the builders understood that consciousness itself is affected by geometric relationships, not just within human-scale structures, but between those structures and cosmic patterns? Initiation chambers, geometric technologies of transformation. Many ancient sacred structures contain spaces specifically designed for initiation, controlled environments where individuals would undergo profound shifts in consciousness through the combined effects of geometry, sound, light, and ritual. These spaces can be understood as geometric technologies designed to facilitate specific transformations of awareness. The King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, for instance, combines multiple consciousness-altering elements, precise geometric proportions that embody mathematical constants, acoustic properties that generate standing wave patterns at frequencies associated with altered states, placement within the larger structure that shields the space from external electromagnetic influences while potentially concentrating specific energetic qualities, and alignment with cosmic geometries that would create particular effects at specific astronomical times. Similarly, the innermost sanctums of ancient Greek mystery schools, Egyptian temples, and Gothic cathedrals were designed according to precise geometric principles that would create specific effects on the consciousness of those who entered, especially when combined with other elements like chanting, controlled lighting, or specific movements through the space. These initiation chambers were not merely symbolic spaces, but functional technologies, geometric instruments designed to facilitate specific transformations of consciousness. The initiatory experience was not just psychological or educational, but involved actual shifts in perception and awareness catalyzed by the geometric properties of the space itself. Have you ever noticed how certain spaces seem to naturally induce altered states of awareness? How some environments feel charged with a particular quality of energy, or seem to facilitate specific modes of perception? What if these subjective experiences reflect actual interactions between your consciousness and the geometric properties of the space? The human body and sacred architecture. A fundamental principle in sacred architectural design is the correspondence between the proportions of the human body and the proportions of the temple or sacred structure. This principle, articulated in Vitruvius's classical formulation and famously illustrated in Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, establishes the human form as a microcosm of universal proportions. In temple design across traditions, the proportions of the human body serve as a module for architectural measurements. The Hindu Vastu Shastra and Shilpa Shastras, ancient architectural treatises, explicitly base temple proportions on the proportions of the human body, with different parts of the temple corresponding to different parts of the cosmic body. Similarly, Gothic cathedral design incorporates proportional systems based on the human form, with specific ratios determining the relationships between various architectural elements. This correspondence creates a resonant relationship between the human visitor and the sacred space, a geometric harmony between the proportions of the body and the proportions of the building. When you enter a space designed according to these principles, your physical form exists in mathematical resonance with the architectural form, creating a subtle but profound alignment. What if this alignment facilitates a shift in consciousness, an attunement of individual awareness to the same cosmic proportions embodied in the architecture? What if the experience of sacredness in these spaces is not merely symbolic or psychological, but represents an actual resonance between your own geometric structure and the geometric structure of the building? Sacred geometry in modern architecture. While contemporary architecture has largely abandoned the sacred proportional systems of traditional design, some modern architects have consciously incorporated these principles into their work. Antoni Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, for instance, represents a remarkable synthesis of sacred geometric principles with modern construction techniques. Its complex forms embody multiple sacred proportions while creating acoustic environments that generate specific vibrational effects. Similarly, certain contemporary sacred spaces, from meditation centers to ceremonial structures, have been designed according to traditional proportional systems, often with remarkable effects on those who enter them. Some modern architects working with ecological principles have rediscovered the value of sacred proportions, recognizing that buildings designed according to these relationships tend to feel more harmonious and life-supporting. Even in secular contexts, buildings designed according to sacred proportional systems often elicit positive responses from occupants, who report feelings of harmony, balance, and well-being without necessarily understanding the mathematical principles involved. This suggests that the human system naturally resonates with these proportions regardless of cultural conditioning or conscious awareness of their significance. What if the crisis of meaning and disconnection in much of modern architecture stems not merely from aesthetic or cultural factors, but from the abandonment of proportional systems that naturally resonate with human consciousness? What if our built environments could become technologies of awakening rather than merely functional containers, creating sacred space in everyday life? While we may not all have the opportunity to design or construct buildings according to sacred geometric principles, we can apply these understandings to create more harmonious environments in our everyday lives. Here are some practical applications to consider. 1. Proportional arrangement. Organize the elements in your living or working space according to golden ratio proportions. This can be as simple as placing furniture or decorative elements at distances that reflect this ratio, approximately 1 to 1.618. 2. Geometric focal points. Incorporate images or objects that embody sacred geometric patterns, from flower of life designs to spiral forms, as focal points in your environment. These serve not merely as decorative elements, but as resonant fields that affect the overall energetic quality of the space. 3. Sound architecture. Pay attention to the acoustic properties of your spaces. Simple adjustments like the placement of reflective or absorptive surfaces can significantly alter how sound moves through a room, creating more harmonious sonic environments. 4. Alignment awareness. Consider the orientation of your spaces relative to cardinal directions and natural features. Even simple alignments, like arranging a meditation or sleeping space on the north-south axis, aligning with the Earth's magnetic field, can create subtle but significant effects. 5. Fractal complexity. Incorporate elements with fractal properties, objects or images that embody self-similarity at different scales, like certain plants, natural materials, or artistic representations of fractal patterns. Research has shown that exposure to fractal complexity at certain scales has beneficial effects on stress levels and cognitive function. The living temple, perhaps the most profound application of sacred architectural principles, lies not in external structures, but in the recognition of your own body as a living temple, a sacred architecture designed according to the same cosmic proportions that inform traditional sacred buildings. The proportions of your physical form, the geometric patterns of your energy centers, often described as chakras in Eastern traditions, the spiral formations in your DNA, the fractal branching of your nervous system and circulatory pathways, all embody the same sacred geometric principles we've been exploring. Your body is not separate from these cosmic patterns, but a perfect expression of them at the human scale. This understanding transforms how you might relate to both sacred architecture and your own embodiment. When you enter a traditionally designed sacred space, you're not merely visiting an external structure, but experiencing a resonance between the geometric principles embodied in the building and those same principles expressed through your own form. The experience of sacredness arises from this recognition, not just intellectually, but vibrationally, of your own nature reflected in the architectural environment. Similarly, practices that cultivate awareness of your body as a geometric instrument, from certain forms of yoga to specific movement meditations to visualizations of internal energy geometry, can awaken recognition of your embodiment as a sacred architecture. Rather than experiencing your physical form as separate from spiritual principles, you begin to recognize it as a perfect expression of those principles in material form. The blueprint remembered. As we conclude our exploration of architectural harmonics, I invite you to consider the built environment not merely as functional or aesthetic, but as an expression of consciousness made visible, a materialization of geometric principles that can either align with or disrupt the natural harmonies of life. The sacred structures that have survived throughout human history stand as reminders of a profound understanding that the same geometric principles that structure galaxies and atoms, flowers and crystals, musical harmonies and color spectra can be consciously incorporated into human creation. These buildings are not merely monuments to past beliefs, but functional technologies that continue to affect consciousness through their geometric properties. When you encounter such spaces, whether ancient temples, Gothic cathedrals, or contemporary structures designed according to sacred proportions, approach them not just as historical or aesthetic curiosities, but as opportunities for resonant alignment. Allow yourself to experience how these environments affect your awareness, how their proportions and acoustic properties shift your perception, how their alignments and orientations connect you to larger cosmic patterns. For in recognizing these effects, you begin to remember something essential, that the sacred geometry embodied in these structures is not external to you, but is the very pattern of your own being. The temple is not merely a building, but a reminder of the temple that you are, a living architecture of consciousness expressing through form. As we move forward in our exploration, we will examine how these geometric principles can be directly applied as tools for consciousness expansion and intentional creation. How the sacred code we've been deciphering can become not merely an object of study, but a living practice of conscious participation in the geometric unfoldment of reality. Chapter 8: Applying Sacred Geometry. Meditation, Energy Work, Conscious Creation. Throughout our exploration, we have examined sacred geometry as a universal language that structures everything from atoms to galaxies, from sound waves to architectural forms. Now we turn to perhaps the most important dimension of this study: how to apply these geometric principles as practical tools for consciousness expansion and intentional creation. For sacred geometry is not merely an intellectual curiosity, but a living technology, a system of knowledge that, when properly understood and applied, can transform how you perceive and interact with reality itself. Geometric meditation, aligning consciousness with cosmic pattern. At the foundation of applied sacred geometry lies the practice of geometric meditation, the deliberate alignment of consciousness with specific geometric forms to access their inherent qualities and informational content. This practice appears across diverse traditions, from tantric visualization of yantras, geometric diagrams, to Kabbalistic contemplation of the tree of life, from Sufi meditation on geometric patterns to Pythagorean contemplation of the Platonic solids. The process is both simple and profound. By holding a specific geometric form in focused awareness, you create a resonant field between your consciousness and the mathematical principles embodied in that form. This resonance can catalyze shifts in perception, energy flow, and even the structure of consciousness itself. To begin exploring geometric meditation, select a sacred geometric form that particularly resonates with you, perhaps the flower of life, a specific Platonic solid, the Sri Yantra, or the golden spiral. Create or obtain a clear visual representation of this form, or work with a three-dimensional model if available. Sit in a comfortable position with a relaxed yet alert posture and allow your gaze to rest gently on the center of the pattern. Without straining or forcing, simply remain present with the image, allowing your perception to naturally evolve. You might notice how the form appears to shift or pulse, how certain aspects become more prominent while others recede, how your awareness moves through different layers or dimensions of the pattern. As you continue, you may wish to experiment with different approaches. 1. Receptive contemplation. Simply observe the form with open awareness, noticing what arises in your perception without directing or controlling the experience. This approach allows the inherent qualities of the geometry to naturally affect your consciousness. 2. Analytical meditation. Consciously explore the mathematical relationships within the form, the ratios, proportions, symmetries, and transformations that create its structure. This approach engages the analytical mind as a gateway to deeper intuitive understanding. 3. Embodied visualization. Imagine the geometric form within your own energy field or physical body, perhaps visualizing it centered at specific energy centers or encompassing your entire being. This approach creates a direct resonance between the geometric principles and your own energetic structure. 4. Dynamic engagement. Visualize the form in motion, rotating, pulsing, transforming, or moving through different dimensional expressions. This approach reveals how static geometric forms relate to dynamic processes and flows. What you may discover through these practices is that each geometric form seems to catalyze specific qualities of consciousness or energetic states. The perfect symmetry of the Platonic solids might induce experiences of balance and integration. The infinite regression of fractal patterns might facilitate experiences of self-similarity across scales of awareness. The dynamic equilibrium of the golden spiral might evoke sensations of balanced growth and harmonious unfoldment. Have you noticed how focusing on different geometric patterns seems to activate different qualities of awareness? How some forms feel expansive, while others feel centering? How certain patterns seem to resonate with specific aspects of your being? These subjective experiences reflect the actual resonance between the mathematical principles embodied in the geometry and the same principles operating within your own consciousness. Sacred geometry and the energy body. Beyond mental contemplation, sacred geometric principles can be directly applied to work with the human energy field, what various traditions call the subtle body, the aura, or the biofield. This multidimensional energy system, which interpenetrates and extends beyond the physical body, naturally organizes according to geometric principles. In many traditions, the primary energy centers or chakras are depicted as geometric forms, from the 4-petaled lotus of the root chakra to the 1,000-petaled lotus of the crown. These are not merely symbolic representations, but reflect actual geometric configurations of energy as perceived by those with developed subtle perception. Different geometric forms correspond to different frequency ranges and functional qualities within the human energy system. Working with sacred geometry can help balance, activate, and integrate these energy centers through resonant alignment. Here are some approaches to explore. 1. Geometric breathing. Visualize inhaling and exhaling through a specific geometric form positioned at or around a particular area of your body. For example, you might visualize breathing through a tetrahedron at the solar plexus to enhance personal power and focused will, or through a dodecahedron at the heart center to facilitate compassionate awareness. 2. Geometric movement. Incorporate sacred geometric principles into physical movement practices. Certain forms of sacred dance, Tai Chi and yoga, consciously trace geometric patterns in space, creating resonant fields that affect both the practitioner's energy system and the surrounding environment. 3. Geometric healing. Apply specific geometric templates to areas of energetic imbalance or physical discomfort. This might involve visualizing a geometric form encompassing the affected area, using physical models or images placed near the body, or tracing geometric patterns with the hands in the biofield around the body. 4. Merkaba. Activation. Work with the Merkaba, or light vehicle, a specific geometric configuration formed by interpenetrating tetrahedra that, according to certain esoteric traditions, can activate higher dimensional awareness and facilitate consciousness transfer between different planes of existence. These practices are not merely symbolic or psychological, but work with actual geometric organizations of energy. The effectiveness of such approaches derives from the fundamental principle we've been exploring throughout this book, that geometry is not just a description of form, but an expression of the mathematical relationships that structure reality at all levels. Sacred geometry in creative expression. Another powerful application of sacred geometric principles lies in conscious creative expression, whether through visual art, music, movement, writing, or any other creative medium. By incorporating these principles into your creative process, you align your expression with the same mathematical harmonies that structure natural systems. In visual art, this might involve using sacred proportions, like the golden ratio, to determine compositions, incorporating specific geometric forms as elements or underlying structures, or creating mandalas based on principles like radial symmetry and fractal self-similarity. Many of the most enduring works of art throughout human history, from Renaissance paintings to Islamic geometric art, consciously incorporate these principles. In music, sacred geometry manifests through harmonic relationships based on simple whole number ratios, rhythmic structures that embody sacred proportions, and compositional forms that mirror geometric principles like symmetry, fractal self-similarity, and golden ratio relationships. Composers from Bach to Debussy have consciously worked with these mathematical principles to create music that resonates with natural harmony. In movement arts like dance, sacred geometry appears in the patterns traced by the body in space, the proportional relationships between different movements, and the creation of dynamic forms that embody principles like spiraling growth or balanced opposition. Many traditional sacred dances explicitly work with geometric patterns as a means of aligning individual and collective consciousness with cosmic principles. In writing, sacred geometric principles can inform narrative structure, the relationship between different elements of a text, and even the rhythm and proportion of language itself. Certain poetic forms, for instance, embody mathematical relationships that create specific effects on consciousness when experienced. By consciously incorporating these principles into your creative expression, you create not merely aesthetic objects or experiences, but resonant fields that can affect consciousness through mathematical harmony. Your creations become not just expressions of personal vision, but alignments with universal pattern. Not just things you make, but geometries you activate. Sacred geometry in daily life. Beyond formal practices of meditation, energy work, or creative expression, sacred geometric principles can be integrated into everyday life as a continuous practice of conscious alignment. Here are some approaches to consider. 1. Environmental design. Arrange your living and working spaces according to sacred proportions and geometric principles. This might involve furniture placement based on golden ratio relationships, incorporation of specific geometric forms as decorative elements, or attention to how energy flows through space according to geometric patterns. 2. Attentional geometry. Become aware of the geometric patterns you create through your attention and movement in daily life. Notice the lines, circles, spirals, and other forms you trace as you move through your environment, and experiment with consciously creating more harmonious patterns. 3. Relationship geometry. Consider the geometric configurations created in your relationships, the triangulations, circles, networks, and other patterns formed through connection with others. Work consciously with these relational geometries to create more balanced and harmonious interactions. 4. Natural alignment. Spend time observing and aligning with the sacred geometry expressed in natural systems, from the spiral patterns of plants to the branching structures of trees, from the hexagonal cells of honeycomb to the crystalline structures of minerals. Allow your perception to recognize and resonate with these natural expressions of geometric harmony. 5. Geometric intention. Set intentions according to geometric principles, perhaps visualizing desired outcomes or states of being as specific geometric forms, or using sacred geometric diagrams as templates for manifestation practices. These everyday applications transform sacred geometry from an abstract study into a living practice, a continuous engagement with the mathematical principles that structure both physical reality and consciousness itself. Through this integration, you begin to perceive and participate in what might be called the geometric intelligence operating throughout creation. Geometric consciousness, perceiving the matrix. As you work with sacred geometric principles through various practices and applications, you may begin to experience shifts in how you perceive reality itself. Many practitioners report developing a kind of geometric sight, an ability to perceive the underlying mathematical patterns that structure apparently diverse phenomena. This perceptual shift might begin with noticing geometric forms that previously escaped your attention. The pentagonal structure of certain flowers, the logarithmic spiral of a nautilus shell, the hexagonal pattern of bubbles in a foam. It might extend to recognizing these same patterns in less obvious contexts, the spiral dynamics of weather systems, the fractal organization of social networks, the vibrational geometries of emotional states. As this perception deepens, you may begin to experience reality not as a collection of separate objects and events, but as a unified field structured by interwoven geometric patterns, what some traditions call the matrix or the grid. This is not merely a conceptual understanding, but a direct perception of the mathematical relationships that connect seemingly disparate aspects of experience. This mode of perception has been described in various spiritual traditions as a form of enlightened awareness, a recognition of what Buddhist teachings call dependent origination, or what Hermetic philosophy describes as seeing the patterns that connect. It represents not an escape from material reality, but a deeper perception of its underlying structure and interconnectedness. Have you ever had moments when you seem to perceive not just objects, but the relationships between them? When the world appeared not as separate things, but as a unified pattern of connection? When you recognize the same forms repeating at different scales throughout your experience? These glimpses represent the awakening of geometric consciousness, a mode of perception that recognizes the mathematical harmony underlying apparent diversity. The ethics of sacred geometry. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration, it's important to consider the ethical dimensions of working with sacred geometric principles. Throughout history, this knowledge has been approached not merely as technical information, but as sacred wisdom carrying significant responsibility. In many traditional contexts, sacred geometric knowledge was carefully guarded, not out of elitism, but from recognition of its power to affect consciousness and reality. Initiates were prepared not just intellectually, but morally and spiritually before receiving certain geometric teachings, ensuring they would use this knowledge in harmony with natural principles rather than for manipulation or control. This ethical dimension remains relevant today. As you work with sacred geometry as a technology of consciousness, consider these guiding principles. 1. Harmonic alignment. Apply geometric principles in ways that enhance natural harmony rather than imposing arbitrary patterns. Work with rather than against the inherent geometries of living systems. 2. Respectful engagement. Approach traditional sacred geometric systems with respect for their cultural and spiritual contexts, recognizing that these patterns were often discovered through generations of careful observation and practice. 3. Balanced application. Integrate intellectual understanding with intuitive resonance, analytical precision with heart-centered awareness. Sacred geometry engages both hemispheres of the brain and both rational and intuitive modes of knowing. 4. Shared illumination. Share geometric understanding in ways that empower others to perceive and work with these principles directly, rather than creating dependency or mystery where none is needed. 5. Evolutionary intent. Apply sacred geometric knowledge toward the evolution of consciousness and the enhancement of life, recognizing that these patterns represent not just abstract forms, but expressions of the intelligence that structures existence itself. By approaching sacred geometry with these ethical considerations, you align your practice with the same principles of harmony, balance, and integration embodied in the geometric patterns themselves. Your work with these forms becomes not merely a technique but a relationship, a conscious participation in the mathematical beauty that permeates creation. The geometry of awakening. As we complete our journey through the sacred code of geometric reality, I invite you to consider a profound possibility: that the study and application of sacred geometry represents not merely an intellectual pursuit or spiritual practice, but a technology of awakening, a system for recognizing your own nature as an expression of the same creative intelligence that structures the cosmos. The geometric patterns we've explored, from the flower of life to the platonic solids, from the golden ratio to the harmonic relationships of sound, are not external to you, but are expressions of the same mathematical principles that structure your own being. Your body, your energy field, your consciousness itself embodies these same patterns at different scales and frequencies of manifestation. In this recognition lies perhaps the deepest application of sacred geometry, the realization that you are not separate from the geometric intelligence that permeates creation, but are a unique expression of it. Your consciousness is not something that perceives geometric reality from outside, but is itself a geometric phenomenon, a particular configuration of the same awareness that structures all of existence. This understanding transforms spiritual practice from an effort to connect with something external to a recognition of what you already are. The geometric patterns become not just objects of study or tools for transformation, but mirrors reflecting your own nature as a multidimensional being expressing through form. In the words attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, "As above, so below, as within, so without. As the universe, so the soul." This hermetic axiom takes on new meaning when we recognize that the same geometric principles operate at all scales of existence, from the structure of galaxies to the organization of atoms, from the patterns of collective human behavior to the dynamics of individual consciousness. Your journey with sacred geometry does not end with the completion of this book, but continues as an ongoing exploration, a progressive recognition of how these principles manifest through every aspect of your experience. Each geometric form, each mathematical relationship, each harmonic pattern becomes not just information, but invitation, an opportunity to recognize and align with the creative intelligence expressing through you and all of existence. For in the end, the sacred code we've been decoding is not separate from the one who decodes it. The geometry we've been exploring is not distinct from the consciousness that perceives it. The mathematical harmony we've been studying is not external to the awareness that recognizes it. Subject and object, observer and observed, human and divine. These apparent dualities dissolve in the recognition that all are expressions of the same geometric intelligence manifesting through infinite forms while remaining essentially one. And in this recognition lies the ultimate purpose of sacred geometry. Not merely to understand the structure of reality, but to remember your place within it. Not as a separate entity moving through a geometric universe, but as a unique expression of the same creative principle that generates all geometric forms. Not as a being contained by the cosmic pattern, but as the pattern itself, awakening to its own nature through the particular configuration of consciousness that you call I. Conclusion: seeing the sacred code in everyday life. As our journey through the geometric language of creation comes to a close, we stand at a threshold between intellectual understanding and lived experience, between conceptual knowledge and perceptual transformation. The sacred geometric principles we've explored are not merely fascinating patterns to study, but living realities to recognize in every aspect of existence. The question now becomes, how will you see and participate in this geometric intelligence as it expresses through your daily life the visible and invisible geometries? Throughout this exploration, we've moved between visible and invisible manifestations of sacred geometry, between the forms we can perceive with our physical senses and the principles that structure consciousness itself. We've seen how the same mathematical relationships appear in the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of ferns, in the harmonics of music and the proportions of architecture, in the structure of crystals and the organization of living cells. Yet perhaps the most profound recognition is that these geometric principles don't stop at the boundary of your perception. They continue into the very structure of the perception itself. The consciousness with which you've been contemplating these patterns is itself a geometric phenomenon, organized according to the same mathematical principles that structure everything you perceive. This recognition dissolves the apparent boundary between observer and observed, between the one who studies sacred geometry and the patterns being studied. You are not separate from these geometric principles, but are an expression of them, a unique configuration of the same creative intelligence that generates all forms while remaining formless in essence. From pattern recognition to conscious participation, the journey of sacred geometric understanding typically unfolds through several stages. First comes recognition, noticing these patterns in the world around you, perhaps initially as interesting curiosities or aesthetic phenomena. You begin to see the golden spiral in shells and galaxies, the flower of life pattern in cellular structures, the platonic solid relationships in molecular formations. Next comes intellectual understanding, comprehending the mathematical relationships that create these forms and the principles they embody. You learn about phi proportions, Fibonacci sequences, geometric progressions, and vibrational resonance. Then arises experiential engagement, working directly with these patterns through meditation, creative expression, energy practices, or conscious design. You begin to feel how different geometric forms affect consciousness, how proportional relationships create harmony or discord, how vibrational geometries influence states of being. Finally emerges conscious participation, recognizing yourself as an expression of these same principles and deliberately aligning your awareness and action with the geometric intelligence operating throughout creation. You begin to live not just in a geometric universe, but as a geometric being, consciously participating in the mathematical harmony that structures existence. Where do you find yourself in this progression? Are you primarily at the stage of recognition, intellectual understanding, experiential engagement, or conscious participation? Or perhaps moving between these phases depending on the context? There is no judgment in this inquiry, only an invitation to notice where you are and what might be the next natural unfoldment in your relationship with sacred geometric principles. The geometry of everyday experience. As you move forward from this exploration, I invite you to bring sacred geometric awareness into your everyday experience, to notice how these patterns and principles manifest not just in special contexts, but in the ordinary moments that constitute most of your life. Notice the geometry of natural processes, how water spirals down a drain, how plants grow toward light, how clouds form and dissipate, how animals move through space. These are not random phenomena, but expressions of the same geometric intelligence we've been exploring. Observe the geometry of human creation, how cities develop along certain patterns, how traffic flows according to specific dynamics, how architecture embodies particular proportions, how music creates geometric structures in time. These cultural expressions reflect the same mathematical principles that structure natural systems. Recognize the geometry of social relationships, how connections between people form networks, how information propagates through communities, how collective behaviors emerge from individual actions. These interpersonal dynamics follow geometric principles of connection and resonance. Become aware of the geometry of your own consciousness, how thoughts relate to each other, how emotions flow and transform, how awareness itself expands and contracts, how attention creates patterns in your experience. These internal processes embody the same geometric principles that structure external reality. By bringing this awareness into everyday life, sacred geometry becomes not an esoteric study, but a living practice, a continuous recognition of and participation in the mathematical harmony that permeates existence. The distinction between sacred and ordinary begins to dissolve as you perceive the same divine proportion in a cathedral spire and a blade of grass, in a cosmic spiral and a kitchen whirlpool, in an ancient yantra and a modern traffic pattern. The individual and universal expression. One of the most beautiful aspects of sacred geometry is how it reconciles individuality and universality, how it allows for unique expression while maintaining fundamental harmony. Each snowflake embodies the same hexagonal symmetry, yet manifests a completely unique pattern. Each human face follows the same golden proportional relationships, yet expresses an individual identity. Each spiral galaxy adheres to logarithmic proportions, yet develops its own distinctive form. This principle applies to consciousness as well. Your awareness embodies the same geometric intelligence that structures all consciousness, yet expresses it in a completely unique configuration, a particular perspective and creative capacity that has never existed before and will never be replicated. This understanding transforms how you might view your own purpose and expression. Rather than trying to impose an arbitrary pattern on your life or conform to external expectations, you can recognize and align with the unique geometric unfoldment that wants to express through you, the particular configuration of the universal pattern that constitutes your authentic being. What geometric qualities seem to naturally express through your consciousness? What proportional relationships? What symmetries? What growth patterns characterize your authentic expression? How might conscious alignment with these inherent qualities facilitate a more harmonious and fulfilling life? The ongoing geometric exploration. The study of sacred geometry is never truly complete. It represents an infinite exploration of the mathematical principles that structure reality at all scales. As you continue this journey beyond the pages of this book, here are some directions you might explore. 1. Interdisciplinary connections. Investigate how sacred geometric principles appear across different fields, from quantum physics to biological systems, from music theory to social dynamics, from cosmology to consciousness studies. These cross-disciplinary explorations reveal the universal applicability of these mathematical relationships. 2. Cultural expressions. Explore how different cultures and traditions have recognized and worked with sacred geometric principles. From Islamic geometric art to Hindu yantra designs, from Celtic knotwork to Native American medicine wheels, from Chinese feng shui to African fractal patterns. These diverse expressions reveal both the universality of these principles and their unique cultural interpretations. 3. Personal practice. Develop your own regular practice of engagement with sacred geometry, whether through meditation, artistic creation, movement, sound, or conscious design. Allow this practice to evolve organically as your understanding and perception deepen. 4. Community engagement. Connect with others who are exploring sacred geometric principles, sharing insights, practices, and applications. Collective exploration often reveals dimensions of understanding that might not emerge through solitary study. 5. Natural immersion. Spend time in natural environments specifically observing the geometric patterns that appear, from the branching of trees to the formation of river deltas, from the spiral patterns of plants to the crystalline structures of minerals. nature remains the greatest teacher of sacred geometric principles, the living code. As we conclude our exploration, I invite you to consider sacred geometry not as a fixed system of knowledge, but as a living code, a dynamic language through which the intelligence of creation expresses itself in endless variation while maintaining essential harmony. This code is not something to be memorized, but something to be recognized. Not something to be mastered, but something to be aligned with. The geometric patterns we've explored, from the Vesica Piscis to the flower of life, from the Platonic solids to the golden spiral, are not merely ancient symbols, but current realities, expressing continuously through every aspect of existence. They represent not historical artifacts, but present activities, the ongoing creative expression of mathematical intelligence through form. Your engagement with this living code transforms how you perceive and participate in reality. You begin to recognize that you are not moving through a geometric universe, but are a geometric being, a unique expression of the same mathematical harmony that structures galaxies and atoms, music and architecture, consciousness and matter. In this recognition lies perhaps the deepest purpose of sacred geometric study, not merely to understand the structure of reality, but to remember your place within it, not as a separate entity observing geometric patterns, but as a conscious expression of the very intelligence that generates these patterns, not as a being contained by the cosmic design, but as the design itself, awakening to its own nature through the particular configuration of consciousness that you call I. For in the end, the sacred code is not something external to be deciphered, but something internal to be remembered, the mathematical harmony at the heart of your own being, which is one with the harmony at the heart of all existence. And in this remembrance lies the ultimate transformation. From seeing sacred geometry as something out there to recognizing it as the very pattern of your own awareness, from studying the divine blueprint to embodying it consciously in every moment of your life. May your ongoing journey with the sacred code bring ever-deepening recognition of the geometric intelligence that expresses through all of creation, including the unique and beautiful expression that is you. Have you ever considered that the shapes and patterns we've explored today might not just be interesting concepts, but actual keys to understanding your own consciousness? What if these sacred geometric forms are not merely external structures, but internal maps of your own awareness? I invite you to look around your world this week and notice where these patterns appear naturally. In the spiral of a shell, the branching of a tree, or even in the way your own thoughts unfold. What might these patterns be trying to reveal to you about the nature of reality itself? The true value in studying sacred geometry lies not in accumulating esoteric knowledge, but in recognizing that we are not separate observers of these patterns. We are living expressions of them. When we begin to see ourselves as conscious embodiments of the same mathematical principles that structure galaxies and atoms, our relationship with reality fundamentally shifts. We move from trying to manipulate the world from the outside to consciously participating in its geometric intelligence from within. If today's exploration resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your comments about your own experiences with sacred geometry are especially valuable. What patterns have you noticed in your life? What geometric forms seem to speak to you most deeply? Share below and join our community of conscious explorers. And be sure to return on Monday, when we'll be grounding ourselves once again in fundamental principles of conscious reality creation. Until then, may you see the sacred code in everything you encounter. Music fades out,